Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is for September 23rd. We're recording it on September 20th. It is number 171 since the beginning of the pandemic. And we are broadcasting from my home in the heart of Rogers Park, Chicago's fighting 49th Ward. Today, going to have a little chatter, and then I've got two guests coming on. I've got the wonderful Kathy Kelly, longtime peace activist, going to share some information, and Fernando Jones, a playwright, a blues musician, author, etc. He's going to join us and talk about his play, I Was There When the Blues Were Red Hot. I'm just back from a trip to the East Coast. I love coming back to Chicago, but I got to admit that I like getting out of town. And I went east and saw three of my kids and their families. And I went up to a gathering of cousins and their kids and grandkids on my mom's side, upstate Connecticut. And that was pretty wonderful to hang out with the family. Another really good thing that happened to me this week, and it happens pretty regularly, is I get an email. It's called News from the Trenches from Steve Hashimoto, longtime musician here in Chicago. And you can get it if you get a hold of him at hashimoto@aol.com. But he always has a lot of information about people who are, journeyman musicians and who's passed, who's playing where. In this time, he talked about the great photographer, W. Eugene Smith, who did a photograph. If any of you ever saw that great old book, and I'm talking old, called Family of Man, he did the cover of that. And Steve Hashimoto's News from the Trenches is always full of good news. So I would encourage you to get a hold of him if you want to be on his list. Also on the good front, while I was in New York, I noticed there was an awful lot of traffic. Streets were blocked off. There was a meeting at the United Nations, and there were a lot of cars and little motorcades going through and police, and things were pretty jammed up. I came home yesterday, and I did turn on the news, and I got to see some of Zelensky's speech and some of Biden's speech. And as much as you could be critical of the U.S.'s role in a lot of places in the world, I'm pretty much rooting for the people in Ukraine to have their own country and their own independence. So I would pay attention to that. Another good thing I just saw just before we went on to record was the Biden administration is launching the first ever American Climate Corps. This was just announced. It's a workforce training and service initiative aimed at preparing American youth for jobs in clean energy and climate resilience. On the not so good front, we have the ongoing Christo-fascist movement here in the States. We always knew we had a right wing. We had a civil war way back over slavery and economic policy. And Republicans seem to be fighting among themselves. We have a pending debt ceiling crisis, and I don't know what's going to happen with that. The hard right is pretty entrenched, and even if the House passes stuff, it may not be approved by the Senate if they have a say in that. Also, something to pay attention to is this diplomatic row between Canada and India. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said his country suspected India's involvement in the killing of a Sikh leader in Vancouver. That allegation was quickly dismissed by Modi and the Indian government. In Bloomberg Politics reports, it says Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had raised a delicate matter with his host, Modi, at the Group 20 summit, which was in India a few weeks back. Didn't make it public. But we have a situation now where the revelation came out that this Sikh leader in Canada was killed over the independence question, and Modi denies it. So we have an ongoing split between these two countries. You might want to pay attention to that one. Here in the United States, we always like to report on the union movement and the advances and struggles that are ongoing. My union, the Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA, is still out on strike. And also the United Auto Workers are on strike. They started small, but we're recording on Wednesday. On Friday, just the day before this will air, the UAW, United Auto Workers, will expand that strike if they don't get a better offer. So pay attention to that. On the follow-up front, those of you who are regular listeners know that a few weeks ago we had Liz Rathburn, who's involved with the University of Illinois Chicago Students for Democratic Society, and he came on to talk about the Tampa Five. And I got a call just before we recorded this show about the Tampa Five. And those of you who don't know about them, Tampa Five are a group of students who on March 6th had a demonstration and were brutalized by the University of South Florida police. They wanted to talk to the president of the university about diversity, equity, and inclusion programs on campus after the very right-wing Negativo Ron DeSantis outlawed ethnic studies in public colleges and universities. They had entered the administration building to talk with the president. They were attacked by the campus police. 5 women were assaulted, groped, and arrested. They're now facing 10 years in prison. And those people are Chrisley Carpio, Laura Rodriguez, Gia Davala, Lauren Pinheiro, and Jeannie Kita. And they are on a national tour, at least some of them are. They will be in Chicago on September 26th and 27th. And they're having an event, I believe it's at 6 p.m. on September 26th at the Chicago Teachers Union Hall at 1901 West Carroll. And if you want to know more about the Tampa Five and the activities here in Chicago, I'll give you Natalie's email, which is nataliepraneis@hotmail.com. And you can find out more. I think it's important to support these young people. What's been going on in Florida is really negative, and they obviously didn't do anything that deserves the kind of threats that they are under right now. So pay attention to that. Once again, it's the new Students for Democratic Society out of the University of Illinois Chicago in support of the Tampa Five. Here in the 49th Ward, we still have alfresco dining, both here on Glenwood and up on Jarvis, and you might want to go out and enjoy your neighbors who are out in the cooling weather. And also, the Glenwood Avenue Farmers Market will continue on Sundays through October 27th. Last week, we had on our longtime pal, sometimes co-host, a producer of this show, Katie Hogan, and she talked about her trip, which she is now on, walking the Camino over in Spain. We also talked a little bit of politics, things that she's going to pay attention to when she comes back. And we had Dan Kugler and Daniel Jerkowski talking about raising money and support for ongoing operations in Ukraine to help people who are in need, given the warlike conditions over there. All right, that'll be enough of the banter. Just on a sports note, so you know, the Bears aren't doing so hot. The Cubs won last night. That would have been Tuesday. They are still in the hunt for a wild card. And the White Sox are, playing some okay ball, but they're way out of it, and we are looking forward to next year. We'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland. Our Kathy Kelly will be our first guest, so get ready. See you in a minute. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of September 23rd, and we are recording it on the 20th. And it always brings me a lot of pleasure to bring on our next guest, someone who's been on the show a number of times, the longtime American peace activist, pacifist, and author, Kathy Kelly. And for those of you who don't know, Kathy is a founding member of Voices in the Wilderness. She's president of World Beyond War. She's been to Iraq 26 times, combat zones, U.S.-Iraq war stuff. Her activism has focused on Afghanistan, Yemen, and Gaza. She's participated in a lot of domestic protests against U.S. drone policy, arrested more than 60 times. I only have a few myself. And some of that was not only here in the States, but some of it abroad. and she's written about her experiences of the U.S. military bombardment, and she's concerned with inmates imprisoned in the U.S. So that's a lot that we will not get all into today, but we'll do some of it. Good afternoon to you, Kathy.
Well, hello, Mike. I'm so pleased to be back on the Heartland Live, and thank you to your son, Hal, for getting us together.
Yeah, he's good at that. I'm like a Luddite on the tech stuff. Well, I've learned a few things, but as I know, you've just been dealing with your computers.
No, I don't learn.
Let me start off by asking you about World Beyond War. That's a new one on me. You used to have, what was the other group that you just ended?
Oh, voices for creative nonviolence. And
Uh-huh. So what's World Beyond War?
Well, World Beyond War doesn't cherry pick. World Beyond War is against every war. I'm already against the next war. And it's an effort internationally to keep on building chapters all around the world wherein people can express their resistance to war and find different ways to nonviolently protest both the wars and the consequences of wars and the weapon sellers who promote and exacerbate these wars. So we have a conference coming up this weekend. We just go to worldbeyondwar.org, and it'll be interesting because this one focuses on successful times when people were able to nonviolently resolve disputes and stop a war.
Well, we did stop the Vietnam War eventually after a lot of tragedy. That's a pretty good thing. So this conference is World Beyond War, and people can find out information at worldbeyondwar.org. Is it something that's going to be in person also?
Well, no, this is entirely online. And if you register, you can catch up with any of the conference modules that you might miss. And I think that it'll go on throughout the whole weekend. People can just go to worldbeyondwar.org and figure out what the schedule is and see what they might especially want to tune into. But I'm very pleased because they're giving a spot for me and two of my colleagues to talk about the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal coming up in November.
Well, let's deal with that, the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. But this show airs on Saturday morning on LUW 88.7, WLUW.org. It's on from 9 to 10. So people who will be hearing it then, and they can go right to World Beyond War and get involved. Let's shift over to Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. That's in November. Tell us a little bit about that, Kathy.
Well, this idea of focusing on merchants of death being the weapon makers, the people who make enormous profits from selling weapons like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and General Dynamics and General Atomics. This is a pretty dated idea. In 1934, a book was written called Merchants of Death, and it became the basis for Senate hearings. And there were over 100 of these hearings in which the weapon companies were held accountable in front of the United States Senate, which was trying to figure out whether or not some of these weapon companies had pushed the United States into World War I. And after the industrialized slaughter of World War I, people began in the United States a very strong anti-war movement. There were 60,000 students in 1935, university students, who went on strike. And many of them signed an oath saying, we'll never be involved in a foreign war. And people might say, oh, that was when the United States was isolationist. But, you know, it was also when the United States said, no, we're not going to let the war profiteers drag us into another war, because there was so much suffering and disaster and trauma caused by World War I. So we think it's a good idea to ask ourselves now, what drags us into these forever wars, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, support for the Saudi war against Yemen. I'll add the war in Ukraine. There has to be a point when ordinary citizens start to ask whether it's in conscience makes any sense while we face ecological collapse to keep on pouring money into what doesn't defend us. The militarists don't defend us against future pandemics. They can't defend us from the consequences of nuclear weapon proliferation. They want more nuclear weapons. And they certainly are not making a more secure world for us in the face of ecological collapse, because we need to learn how to collaborate with other countries and work with their scientists and try to figure out ways to cope with global warming and climate catastrophes. And we can't do that if we're always being goaded to look at this country as an enemy and this country as an enemy, and pour more money into our already bloated military defense budgets. But the people who are in charge of the companies that I just mentioned, they say, oh, well, we're here to protect democracy. And so the United States has to continue to give us whatever we want to protect the United States. But that's not even true. They don't protect democracy. They protect dictators all over the place.
Well, tell us the date of this Merchants of Death war crimes.
Oh, right. Thanks for asking. It starts on November 12th. You know, November 11th is Armistice Day, a good day to remember the ending of World War I. And then on November 12th, we'll have an online event that World Beyond War will host, and we'll ask several of the jurors. So we have some very distinguished jurors from different parts of the world who will be serving as the panel of tribunal judges, if you will, and they'll be introduced, and we'll also introduce the four defendants, General Atomics, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing. And then after that, for about the next, stretching into January 2024, every week there will be a half-hour segment that presents evidence about why we believe that these companies have aided and abetted wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, Palestine, Gaza. And we hope people will get together with others to watch these segments and then discuss them, discuss the implications, give their recommendations to the jurors on what they think should happen. So we see it as an unusual public people's tribunal. And it follows in the tradition of one that stretches all the way back to the Vietnam War, when Bertrand Russell convened the tribunal while that war was still going on.
So we've got two events here. We've got World Beyond War this weekend, the 23rd and 24th, and you can find that if you go to World Beyond War. And then coming up in November, you've got another online event that will continue for months called Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal.
Right, and we're so grateful to students who helped us do a lot of the research. They've done amazing, insightful work researching the kinds of weapons that have been used in these various different wars, writing up the scripts, doing the voiceovers, and coming up with visual imagery for every segment.
Neat. Well, there's a lot of young people doing a lot of good, and hopefully we can get many more to register to vote, because that's all coming up too.
And we should follow the young people, I think. Listen.
Always. All right. Let me, one of the things we had you on the last time you were on the show, you talked about Afghanistan and people who were fleeing the Taliban and the conditions over there. And you talked a lot about the work that you were doing around that. How about giving us an update on the resettlement of Afghan refugees in, I think, mainly Europe, but maybe beyond? Tell us what's going on that front.
Well, it's a very dark time in Afghanistan, particularly for the minority group called the Hazaras. Hazara means a million, and so they're sort of like the millennium generation, and they are a group that's discriminated against because they have Asiatic features, and people say, well, you were descendants of Genghis Khan, and Genghis Khan was bad news for Afghanistan. But it's a really irrational kind of persecution, but they are very much at risk, and several have been badly beaten inside of Taliban jails, and so they have a great desire to flee. And of course, for women, their home becomes a bit like their jail. It's quite hard. The women aren't allowed to go out without a male escort. They're not allowed to go to universities. They can't hold down jobs. And so a lot of the young women have begged us, please, can you help us go to another place? So we created a women's safe space in Pakistan. And we are a very informal group of internationals, some from Australia, some from the UK, from the United States, from Canada, Spain, and Portugal. And we meet twice a month by Zoom. And anyone listening right now, Mike, including you, is very welcome to join these Zoom calls. And they're very effective. We've been able to help so far 25 young people get to Portugal, and they've been thriving there. There are parts of Portugal that are pretty depopulated, and they want young people and they want young families to come there. And also, some of the land is quite arid, and permaculture experts know how to rehabilitate arid land and make it grow. And so I'm so happy to show people pictures of the land that these young people have cultivated that looked as dry as dust, and now it's lush with crops. So that's been going on in Portugal. And meanwhile, there are 24 young people hoping to get visas to go to Spain. And the projects in Portugal are being used as models in two different cities, Mertola and Leiria. And we hope that the ones that are now in Islamabad and anxious because they don't want to be deported back to Afghanistan, we hope we can get them into Spain. And so, I joke and say my life as a travel agent, I don't know anything about renting apartments in Islamabad or trying to figure out visas or getting people on flights. But this is what our group has been paying a lot of attention to, a lot of details, a lot of fundraising. It's sad to me, the United States has no room for any of the young volunteers that we knew. I went to Afghanistan about 30 times, always as a guest of the Afghan peace volunteers. And they were so young when I met them, 12 and 13 years old. And it was a joy to watch them grow up. And they really matured into wonderful people who were so idealistic and altruistic. Anybody, I assure you, anybody would be thrilled to have any one of these young people as a neighbor, as a coworker. But because we didn't pay any of them, because we didn't have any money to pay anybody, they worked as volunteers, we worked as volunteers. We raised money to do very, very good projects like a street kids school and helping widows manufacture heavy blankets and then give those away to people in refugee camps. Really good projects, but it was all volunteer. And so we aren't able to get any of them into the United States. They weren't working for the US government.
Are they still in Afghanistan or are they in Pakistan?
Well, I'm sad to say that 24 are still in Afghanistan. And, I feel terrible. I write letters saying, I'm sorry, if we try to help everybody at once, we can't help anybody. And that's a terrible letter to write when someone's been imprisoned and beaten already. So we tried to give priority to helping the young women get out. We gave priority to the people with, a long record of being with the Afghan peace volunteers. We could only help people with passports. And for about a year, it was almost impossible to get a passport in Afghanistan. And, the black market just thrives in these kinds.
Is the Afghanistan government, the Taliban government, letting people leave the country?
No, they don't want people to leave. They particularly don't want educated people to leave. But on the other hand, they throw educated people in jail. So it's hard to understand. But they have now been telling neighboring countries that they expect them to collaborate and not be encouraging or receiving refugees. So Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, it gets more and more difficult for people to enter those countries and stay there safely.
And women in Afghanistan can't work, right? As you said, they're in their home and it's like a jail.
Yeah, I had thought that at least in hospitals like the emergency surgical centers for victims of war that are run by these wonderful Italian organizers and medical people. I thought that the women would be able to keep their jobs in healthcare, but many of those women can't. And, before the Taliban takeover, the emergency hospital vehicles have a big red E as their insignia. It almost looks like the Euro sign, but it stands for emergency. And they could go anywhere and never, ever be attacked because people knew that they would stitch up anybody. They didn't pick one side or another. And they were a greatly beloved group. But even now, that group isn't free to travel easily. So it's a problem. And yet, I think that the United States imposing a freeze on Afghanistan's assets has really hurt the poorest of people, the most vulnerable. The Taliban aren't necessarily missing a meal, but these kinds of draconian decisions to freeze people's assets are making it even more likely that the economy will crumble.
Let me just ask you quickly, how do they join that Zoom where you talk about the Taliban or you talk about the young women and you're trying to help get out?
Yeah. Well, for that, I just would ask people to email me. My email is easy, Kathy, Kathy, at vcnv.org. It's we don't have a formal name for this group, to be honest. We're very ad hoc. But
I'm sure we'll have you back on. You'll be able to talk more about that. Let me ask you in the last few minutes we have, your path to activism and organizing. How did you get to where you are?
Well, like I was at Loyola University when Tom Clark had taken an action to protest the Vietnam War. And he didn't know how much trouble he was going to get into. They called themselves the Four of Us.
Tom Clark is a co-producer of this show, sometimes a co-host.
And he's got a long friendship with Mike James. Well, so I can remember Barry Soltis asking me, would I go to an organizing meeting to pay attention to what Tom Clark and others had done? And I thought about it and I thought, no, I'm not going to go to that meeting. And I didn't. But I didn't feel good about that decision. I sort of wondered, I think I said I had something better to do, but I began to think, I really didn't have anything better to do. And it wasn't right to write papers about the war in Vietnam and never, ever have tried to resist it. So that sort of stayed with me, and a kind of a feeling of being unsettled. And then finally, I can only say by a stroke of luck, I moved into the neighborhood where a soup kitchen was located, where I had gone to volunteer. It was the Uptown neighborhood, and It was near the Catholic Worker House. And I had gotten a master's in theology, and I still wasn't helping anybody very much in terms of impoverishment or stopping wars. But I went up there, and then that changed everything. I got to know some of the finest people in the world. I met people who were really living in accord with what they believed. They were trying to stop wars. They didn't shy away from getting arrested. So I became a war tax refuser. I was very influenced, and I told the principal at St. Ignatius College Prep, where I was teaching, could you please lower my salary beneath the taxable income? And I think they would say, could you please go see a psychiatrist? But that was a good start for me to sort of think my way through, what am I willing to go along with and what will I not go along with? And I think ever since then, I felt pretty clear I won't go along with war. And then when you go to war zones, and a lot of veterans, they so much understand this. When you see the devastation, the maiming, the orphaning, the bereavement, the displacement, you don't want to go along with it. And we don't have to. We can say, no, we want to find humane, alternative ways to solve problems. We would never let our children solve problems by killing each other. And so shouldn't the adults kind of cotton up to that idea? So I've been happy to be a war tax refuser and a war resistor. And it has brought me to both prisons and war zones where I leave with a heavy heart. And I always know that I'm so gosh darn privileged. I'm able to leave places that are difficult. And if I go to prison, it's because I chose to. And so I don't experience that sense of stigma and family breakup and inability to get jobs that so many people incarcerated in the United States face. And there's just a lot to try to understand about racism in the United States. But one of the best places to understand it is to look more and more closely at prisons and also at the places in our neighborhoods that are shelters and soup kitchens, and really try to see how we can better use our resources, especially now when we all have to use all of our resources to try to survive planetary collapse, ecological collapse.
Kathy Kelly, you've always been very inspirational to me. And I would like you in our closing moments to maybe share your thoughts on suggestions for, well, let's say for younger people who are getting involved and those who are already involved for maintaining their commitment and their sanity over the long haul.
Well, I hope people won't mind one that might sound kind of condescending, but if you spread the peanut butter too thin, the bread rips. So, don't tear yourself apart trying to join every issue. Find out where your passion is and really focus on that passion, and find kindred spirits. They don't have to be your best friends, but find kindred spirits. And I think courage is the ability to overcome our fears. So where do we find courage? I think we catch courage from one another. And I think it's good to recognize, sure, we all feel fear, but don't let yourself be governed by your parents' fears or your brothers and sisters' fears. Figure out your own fears and try to overcome those, but don't be governed by the fears of others. And also, there's a shortage of love in our world, and it's an artificial shortage. It's a human-made shortage because humans make all these goofy rules. You can't love this person. You can't love that person. That's nonsense. You can love whomever you want. And I'd say stick by that. And you can love your enemy as well.
I like that. And I think that it's important for people to work on themselves and to have a good time. Otherwise, you will burn yourself out. Let me ask you real quickly, what's your most memorable moment, good or bad, in your longtime activist career, let's just say?
You know what I've thought about a lot, Mike, is that one time I was getting arrested for crossing the line at a school that was teaching torture tactics, really, to Central American and South American soldiers. And I'd been arrested enough times that I wasn't really even thinking about it all that much. I was daydreaming, and I was doing what they told me to do, but they were shouting, and the search was very aggressive. And so I said, I'm not going to go along with this. And I put my arms down and said very softly, I'm sorry, I can't cooperate with this any longer. And I was down on the floor and hogtied, and somebody about your size, Mike, was kneeling on me. And I'm hogtied. My ankles and wrists are tied together, and someone's kneeling on my back. And I said, I can't breathe. I'm sorry, you're hurting me. And I can't breathe. And I said, I must have said it about 2 times. And then I thought, I'm going to go out. And so I told them, look, I've had 4 lung collapses in the past and I can't breathe. Well, my lungs are glued up, they're fine. But the guy kneeling on me got off of me, and I got a deep breath, and I was okay. But the reason I'm thinking about that is because if I was George Floyd and I said, I can't breathe, I might not have been here to tell you this story. So coming to grips with the unfair privileges that we have, and coming to grips with colonialism and exploitation and racism. But as you say, we can't burn ourselves out. We have to somehow also come to grips with beauty and goodness.
Here's something else. How about giving our listeners and viewers your email one more time?
One more time. Okay, Kathy, Kathy, at, I'm going to use the military thing. I think V as in Victor, C as in Carlos, N as in Nancy, V as in Victor, at vcnv.org.
Thank you so much for coming on live from the Heartland, Kathy.
Oh, so glad
I get to see you soon. I know you're living in the suburbs, but you'll probably come back to Chicago. I'm sure we'll run into each other in the not too far off.
Well, good. I'll look for you. You can go to the what is the fundraiser coming up for CAPA, the Chicago Area Peace Action? Go to that, folks, and I'll see you there.
All right, sister, we'll see you. And everybody else, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a little break with our next guest on Live from the Heartland for the week of September 23rd. We'll be right back.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, I walk from the west side to the south side of town. Yes, I walk from the west side to the south side of town. I was looking for my baby and my car broke down. Well, I won $1 million playing the lottery game.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of September 23rd. I'm your host, Michael James, and it really brings me a lot of pleasure to bring on my next guest, someone who I'm looking forward to meeting in person, to hearing him play music in person. He is an internationally known blues man, a writer, an actor, and an educator, the one and only Fernando Jones. Hello there, Fernando.
Hey, Big Mike. Thank you, man. Glad to be here. And
Glad to have you. Now, our music producer, Lynn Orman, she always comes up with some great people to come on the show. And I understand that you have, about 25 years ago, you wrote a play that was based on the people you had met in blues clubs and places. It's called I Was There When the Blues Was Red Hot. And you're having an event coming up, 25-year anniversary. Fill us in.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I started playing when I was 4 years old, and my older brothers were blues men, Greg and Forey Superstar. So I've always been involved in the blues. I never stopped playing the guitar, almost 56 years later.
Young guy.
And blues, yeah, young guy. So the blues was always there. So almost every journey in my life has been documented in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So fast forwarding, the book that came out in 1990 inspired a 16 millimeter black and white film that my buddy David Carlson and I did. And somewhere around 1998, that inspired me to write a play called an interactive dramatic comedy, because a lot of people that I knew were dying around me that meant a lot to me, and I meant a lot to them, like Lefty Diz, Junior Wells, Teresa Needham, so on and so forth. And then my eldest brother passed away in 1999. So this play, even though it came out in 98, it was a timely one because it kind of tells the stories of these blues men and blues women from a Black perspective. Often Black musicians, whether it's jazz, blues, or rock and roll, or even folk music, very few of us who are playing write our own stories. And so I think that was something that was unique about this piece because it was written by a cat that's part of the cultural situation. And
so the film is available. People can get it.
The film is a private type thing. David and I, we made the film and we were just showing it around at little film festivals and things like that. So we might reprise that one day. You got to always have something in the vault, you know. We learned that from Prince, right? So you can't put everything out there, and you got to leave something for when you disappear from this place, right?
So in the story, in your I Was There When the Blues Was Red Hot, you talk about various musicians and clubs and the whole scene around blues music.
Yeah, well, basically, it's not necessarily talking about the blues, different blues people, but the different characters are based on people that I met in my life and my journey. And it's kind of like when Shakespeare wrote Everyman. Each one of these characters represents an everyman of that particular ilk, if you will. And it talks about subjects that people, blues men, Black blues men and Black blues women that we talk about in private, but we don't talk about them in public. Some people are not necessarily free to talk. Some people are bound by what they think their record company guy or girl would say if they spoke their mind, and so on and so forth. So it tackles race, it tackles gender bias, and it also tackles humor, because some of the funniest folks I'd ever met in my life are blues people, you know. So it lays it all out there, you know. So,
do you have a favorite person, character, individual in And the play,
Man, you know what? That is a beautiful question. I like the character you dig because you dig is a visionary. He's forward thinking. He's fearless. I also like the character T, who was kind of inspired by Mama Jerry from Jerry's Palm Tavern and Teresa Needham from Teresa's Lounge. She is also a protagonist in the piece. She pushes along, and this club where everything takes place is like her child. Is she has her whole world is wrapped up in this club, where to everybody that comes, the patrons and the musicians, to them it's just a club or hole in the wall. But to her, this is her child, this is her legacy, this is her university, this is her everything. So I really like that character, those two characters. And there are some smaller roles that I really dig too. There's a character called $2, where he's always begging for $2. And he's based off of a humorous blues guy. But then you also have Money Making Mary, who is a gambler, a female, of course, and she's as tough as the guys are. And so it's just, I mean, it's about 9 or 10 characters. So I could probably find something great in all of them that I like. But those are the ones that come to the.
Now, it sounds really great. I used to. I never got to Teresa's, I'll confess. But I did see Muddy Waters and James Cotton at a place. It was on the north side called the Fat Black Pussycat, and that would have been 1962. And then I used to, a little bit later, I'd go to a place called the Blue Flame at 39th and Drexel. And Paul Butterfield was playing there, white blues guy with a Howlin' Wolf's old band. And they were some of the best times I ever had in my life, I got to tell you. Yeah.
And that's why it's important what you're doing in documenting. It's always, if it's not documented, does it exist? I had a conversation earlier about Michelangelo and Da Vinci. They were contemporaries and they were rivals. And in this conversation that I was having with Dr. Kyle, one of my board members, I said, well, what if there was a third guy that was great, or a third woman that was a great sculptor or an inventor? But if you're not documented, you're just relegated to those two rivals. So that's why I've done everything I could, and everything that I can in this lifetime that I have, to document as much as I can surrounding this music that has always, been part of my life.
You've got this event coming up. I think it's October 2nd,
yes,
5 to 7:30 at the U Black Box Theater. Which
right, it's
got it right. Is that the right name?
Yes, it's on the campus of Kennedy King College.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's where it is, and it's a space in Kennedy King College. It's a brand new building. Well, it still looks brand new. If I do my calculus, it might be 8 years old, or 10 years old, or 15 years old, but it looks like it was just ribbon was cut yesterday.
Is that at 740 West 63rd Street?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And it is free, and it doesn't cost anything either.
So you're going to have a reading? Or some of the original people from the play coming in? Or
yes,
tell us what the event's going to be like.
Well, the event is we're going to have a meet and greet. We're going to have merchandise. I'll have copies of the book to sell. All proceeds will go back to Blues Kids Foundation, and Blues Kids Foundation will in turn use this play when it's mounted as a fundraiser. Blues Kids Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization, and we go around the world, and Chicago's included in that world. We go around, we provide free world-class instruction to youth and adults on blues pedagogy. Well, pedagogy for the kids, andragogy for the big kids, the grown folks. And so most of the actors are original. We lost we lost 4. Well, the drummer passed away, which is Roy Boyd. Connie Rice, who played Mississippi Mama and T at different times, she passed away. My nephew Chip Ratliff was a sub bass player there. He passed away. Mama Jerry, of course, the proprietor of Jerry's Palm Tavern, passed away. And back then we ran it in the Palm Tavern, and it was interactive piece. So we hope to mount this piece. And so that night we'll talk a little bit about that. There'll be a reception. I believe it'll start about 5 o'clock to about 5:45. Reception / meet and greet. We'll have live blues that will be happening in that 6 o'clock hour. And then we have a prequel to I Was There When the Blues Was Red Hot, which is Guitar Grady and Waylon Walker, two signifying blues guys that tell their little story on how B.B. King got everything he knew from them, and then it segues right into an adaptation of the full-length play of I Was There When the Blues Was Red Hot. So that whole piece there, that'll probably be like a 35-minute chunk of time. After that, one of the moderators will be Rufus Williams from WVON. And so he'll get a chance to interview some of the cast, and then he will interview me after the harvest time. I was going to say the film. The play read should be over, I believe, around 7 o'clock, between 5 minutes to 7 and 5 minutes after 7. And then he'll interview me. And after that, we'll do autograph signing and all that kind of stuff.
Well, Fernando Jones, do you have any desire and plans lurking around, ready to go to bring this play back, to bring it on the stage again?
That is another great question. Yes, we do. Over the last 25 years, people would ask about every 4 or 5 years, I'd run into some of the cast members and say, man, we got to do the play. And I was like, man, we were younger then, and we had our own facility at the Palm Tavern, and we didn't incur any economic impact. And so now I was talking to somebody, and they said, man, this play, that would have been 25 years ago. So that was in August when I realized it was 25 years. And then, so, I'm a project-oriented type person. So another project back on the plate, got the crew back together, and we rehearsed at my home. Yesterday, we're going to rehearse again on on Friday, and get a couple more in next week, and we're going to be ready. So the plan is to mount it in the fall of 2024, hopefully at Kennedy King, if this reception is well, and our friendship and strategic partnership is still there. And but we'll be ready after this. If somebody wants to mount it, at a facility as early as February, we'll probably be able to do something. So
what's your sense these days of younger people tuning into the blues? I know there's a lot of blues festivals, and a lot of the old masters are passing on if they haven't already. What's your sense of the scene around blues today?
Well, young Black musicians are still playing, and we've always played it. Of course, Eurocentric players are playing, and I think that the myth is that young Blacks don't like the blues. We're not a monolithic
right on
group. So you can have a group of folks that love hip hop or whatever the modern music is. You can have some that love contemporary gospel or Christian or inspirational music, and there are those who play the blues. One of the things that I've seen and living as a Black man and living as a cat who's been playing continually since 4 years old, a lot of times the older guys, maybe a generation or 2 generations above that Black teenager playing, they don't want to let him in. And so he gets turned away, or she gets turned away. Well, they're more welcoming to people from other cultures because we have this stigma or whatever it is that, man, young Blacks don't play the blues. And so we carry that with us. And so when someone comes, because I was one of them, you come around and it take 30 guys before one guy like Willie Dixon or Junior Wells to take me under their wing, or my cousin Lefty Diaz, or my brother, for people to really give you a break. And you see other people in your same age group that don't look like you, they get a break and they get a piece of this cultural thing, and they keep going and they never come back. It was like a reprisal of a conversation from a couple of weeks ago. The John Mayer piece in Rolling Stone magazine. Here's a guy who came through the blues. He couldn't have gone straight to pop as a category, but a lot of people think it is a style. But for all practical purposes, he couldn't have gone from Berkeley right into a pop realm. He came through playing the blues, and it was fascinating, and he got a break, and now he can do whatever he wants to do. And then he says bad things about it. And then you have somebody who everybody looked up to, Eric Clapton, and then he's, you dig up his stuff, and he, back in the 60s, he said Britain should stay white, with all the Black music he got, and the Africans coming there. And then you watch the television yesterday, and the cat from Rolling Stone puts a book out about genius or something, instead of, he could have just said my favorite musicians. And then he goes on to say pretty much that Blacks didn't have the aptitude to be geniuses.
And they kicked him out of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah. And you're living in a world where you're able to see a Prince and Stevie Wonder and Duke Ellington, So
let me ask you if in the play, I was there when the blues was red hot. Are they all Chicago based, or do you got any Texas guys, any like Freddie King? Or
no, it's all Chicago. It's all Chicago.
Good.
This is one night. This is one hot Saturday summer night that all this takes place.
All
and
right.
these issues are, and you dig is the messenger. And we know from every messenger we've ever had, he or she never makes it to the finish line. So you got to come out and see what's happening.
It really sounded good to me. Let me ask you a couple other things.
Sure.
I understand you're an actor. What kind of acting are you doing? You got any work? Are you on strike? I'm a SAG guy myself.
Yeah. Well, I'm an American Federation of Musician member, which is a sister organization to SAG. So when I started as an actor, I was doing with ETA, which is community type theater. I would not break the line to quote unquote act in a film or anything like that. I stand with you, my brother. I hope you guys stand with us. When the local 1028 goes on strike, I'm all for the union, and this is a read. And it's free. So this is not taking any work from anybody at all.
Right on. Now let me ask you another question. You talked about the Blues Camp International, or the Blues Kids. That really sounds like a great program. Give me a little more on that.
Well, ask me a specific question, and I'll give you 5 answers to that.
How long have you been running the Blues for Kids? What are the ages?
I created Blues Kids of America back in 1989 while I was a substitute teacher in Chicago Public Schools. Out of that came Blues Camp. Blues Camp was established. It was created in 2009 and established for the 4th of July, 2010. And we kicked that week off. We had 77 students that came from all around the world, meaning kids from Europe as well, and different parts of the United States. Sometimes people say around the world, and it's just the next state over. And so we did that. We had a balloon launch on Sunday, the 4th of July, and we got a lot of coverage from Howard Reich, our dear friend at Chicago Tribune, as well as ABC7. And from that, man, it took on off, So this summer, we will be in our 15th year of that one, the 15th year of Blues Camp International. And from that, we've done camps literally all over the world, in the UK, in Italy, in Brazil, in Cuba.
Oh, I've been there. I like that.
Yeah. Well, we're establishing one in Brazil. I bespoke for Brazil. I was trying to get Cuba. Don't want to say anything that's inaccurate.
Well, Brazil got a better government now, so it'll probably be better.
Yeah. I was just there to establish when I was over there in March. So that'll happen. If not, what is this year is almost over in 2020.
Fernando, let me ask you: do you have any? I know you got a pretty hot band. I was listening to some of the tunes. I think we're going to use some of them, throughout this show. You got any actual playing gigs coming up?
Yes, I'm playing Saturday at Naughty Lux at the Naughty Lux Bistro, or we could just say Naughty Lux in Markham. It's at 3442 West 159th Street. It is accessible by the toll road, and it is also accessible by I-57. It's safe, it's clean, it's a newly open spot, and we are going to thunder.
We're going to wind this up. I'm going to repeat this. The reading for I Was There When the Blues Was Red Hot will be Monday, October 2nd from 5 to 7:30 at the U Black Box Theater, which is 740 West 63rd Street in Chicago.
On the campus of Kennedy King College.
Right on. Well,
and it's free.
It's free.
And it's for mature audiences, and it's during this time of diversity and equitable inclusion. It'll be great to be in the house.
Well, I got your contact information. I got your phone number, email, and you're going to run into me sooner or later. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. I think you'll have a great event. It looks really good. The artwork, which I think will include the poster, looks good. And I hear great things, and I did listen to a little of your music, and I'm going to listen to a lot
Thank
more.
you, man.
Okay,
Hey,
everybody. We want to thank our friend Fernando Jones. We want to thank Kathy Kelly. We also want to thank our engineer, Hal James, our co-producers, Lynn Orman, Katie Hogan, and Tom Clark. And, you know, I don't want to bum people out, but it's been a rough week on the memoriam front. A couple of people that I knew really well have passed on. One of them would have been my minister, Ted Hoskins, from when I grew up in Connecticut. He was inspirational to me. Francis Yellow, the Lakota artist who did a lot of good artwork around when the Heartland Cafe brought John Trudell to the Heartland. It was Francis Yellow who did the artwork. He just passed away. Our friend James Porter, the disc jockey and the writer and the blues man himself for the rock and roll and blues, he reports that Little Howlin' Wolf, a street singer playing a saxophone that many of you may have seen at the Michigan Avenue Bridge, he has passed away. His name was James Pobiega, and a really wonderful member of Chicago's jazz community, Jim DeJong, has passed away. Sorry to give you all that info, but give him some great spirit, you know? And we encourage you all to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Fernando Jones does, that we all do together. All power to the people. Over and out. See you next week.
Are you doing the best you can? Over the mountain, under the big blue sky, you got a dream awaiting. I can see it in your eye. It may not come easy, but you know you've got a friend. I'll be by your side the entire ride. Just let me hear you say amen. Are you are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you are you doing the best you can? Tout donne, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même parce que tu l'aimes? Tu donnes, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même si tu l'aimes? Tu donnes, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même quand tu l'aimes? Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing